Today we're going to close out on season 4 of the Good Beer Matters podcast, and we're going to kind of kick off the New Year's resolutions season, I guess it is. But we're going to talk to. This is the first time I've had multiple guests on the show, and this is the first time I've actually done a video of the show as well. So if you're listening to this, there is a video. If you're watching this, there is an audio. But today we're going to talk to the team that brought you the PACT, which stands for, I got to check my notes, the Promise of Awareness, Compassion, and Trust. Did I get that right? I'm getting nods from everyone. So we're recording this on Zoom. Everyone is on mute, but I'm going to ask each one of you one by one to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, and the entity that you represent, et cetera. And then we'll kind of launch in. And I'm just going just left to right on my screen. Andrew, would you mind kicking it off?
Yeah, thanks again, Jeremy, for having all of us. This is going to be a fun time. My name's Andrew Copeland. I'm with Craft Beer Professionals. We're a community of 14,000 working in the craft beer industry in all roles. And thanks again for having us today.
Yeah, the honor's all mine. And Lauren, you and I have spoken before. Would you kind of share with us your work and who you are?
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for having us back to talk about this. My name is Lauren Taylor. I'm the director of Safe Bars, which is the code of conduct and training part of PACT. More on that later.
Yeah, we'll dive into that. Or you could go back to a previous episode where we talked about Safe Bars as well. And Betsy, you're next on my screen.
Hello. Oh God. Hi. I'm Betsy. I am the co-founder and owner and head brewer of Lady Justice Brewing in Aurora, Colorado.
Right on. And someone you maybe have heard of before from the podcast or not. I think, Julie, this is technically your 4th time. So next time, I think I owe you a sweatshirt or some sort of swag, right? Since we talked about. Anyway, Julie, please reintroduce yourself.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Jeremy, for having me back again. Yes, it is my 4th time here. This is awesome. My name is Julie Rhodes. I'm the owner operator of Not Your Hobby Marketing Solutions. It is a strategic advisory and educational services company that helps small to medium-sized craft beverage makers learn better sales, marketing, and distribution tactics.
Right on. It's so nice to have you back. AJ, you're next on my screen.
Hey, Jeremy, thank you. And hey, everybody. Nice to be here for the first time. I'm AJ Head. I'm program manager with Safe Bars, which I feel we'll be discussing more about later. But Safe Bars is empowerment, self-defense, and anti-harassment agency that we'll be talking about today. That is part of this PACT initiative. Happy to be joined with my colleagues that we've been working on this with so hard for the past few months, and passionate about having this communication and this dialogue with you all, because hospitality folks are who we go to live life again. So we're just gonna get back into that, and I'm happy to do that.
Yeah. And Dana.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me on the podcast today, first time. So I'm Dana Kaluzny. I am a project facilitator and mentor. I work to support those teams by making social justice work is both something where they're thriving, the people doing the work are thriving, as well as the people benefiting from the work. And on top of that, I'm also the co-owner and co-founder of Enswell Beer, and that will be a small batch brewery in Collingwood, Ontario, Canada, that is all about beer for people who love beer with people. So talking about creating brave, safe spaces and bringing people together is something I'm very passionate about and happy to be on this collaborative team.
Well, and thank you all for being here, and you guys are doing some incredible work, and I feel like I'm just the guy who's going around telling everyone else's stories, but I also like to go out. I like to have a good experience. I like to go out and spend, a time at a brewery with my wife, my kids, and just have a beer or two, and that's kind of like my place where I just want to go decompress. That's where I want to connect. That's where I want to, kind of deal with this world of adulting and the world of challenge that of everything that we face. And for me, a beer is just kind of like that. Okay, we're going to take a little break. And so you guys are actually the ones that are trying to make this a space for everybody, not just for a few people. So thank you for everything you're doing. I'm going to scroll over. I've got some notes, but you guys have incredibly different experiences, different roles. What brought you guys together to create this pact?
That would be
Jeremy,
Andrew.
I'll jump in with this one. Thanks, Lauren. We'll get to you in a moment, I swear. So about a year ago, we launched the creatively named event Panel Fest in CBP. And what Panel Fest was, it was 11 panel conversations over a couple days. And, in craft beer professionals, we aim to not just draw attention to the brewing and business side of our industry, but the ways we can actually be better as human beings. And a couple of the panels on that focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And all the panelists on those conversations, we continue to have conversations, bi-weekly for several months. And they transformed into, well, what can we do now? How can we take actionable steps to make a difference? And at that point, there was the reckoning going on in the craft beer industry. A lot of unfortunate things were happening to our peers. And we asked ourselves, what can we truly do to be better? And the focus of these weekly conversations changed to kind of transform it into what can we put out to the craft beverage industry that can actually make that long-term difference. And we started, all meeting up weekly. Dana came on board to help us, give us that guiding light. And, the rest is almost history since then. We've had a lot of conversations before we even decided to take this public.
And Lauren, were you going to chime in as well?
Well, really what I was saying, that Andrew's the one who started this. He gets the credit for it.
I don't want any credit on this whatsoever. We are a team.
We, one of the panels that he had, I was one of the guests, and we were talking about sexual harassment and other problematic and disrespectful things that appear everywhere, including in the craft beer industry. And I mentioned that we were developing a template code of conduct that anybody could use, and that that people could adopt and adapt for their own establishments. And so Andrew was the one who approached me and said, I'd like craft beer to be on the leading edge of that. Let's do a partnership and take this big. So that's really where it started.
Yeah, and later on, I want to dive into the role that beer has to play in all of the stuff, because that's kind of an interesting concept. One would think that politics should lead. One would think that a particular speaker should lead. But here we are. By the nature of our work, we often end up with a beer in our hand, but we're still trying to do something better in this world, which is kind of an interesting thing. And obviously I'm an advocate, but there'd be those who think, well, it's just a beer. What are you guys going to do? But I think there's a lot that we can do, but we're going to dive into that in just a minute. So just, I want to make sure I tap my foot on all these bases before we get in there. What is the current state that, someone bring me up to speed on the historical perspective and the current state of life and the way that we regard each other. And for anyone who's been under a rock for the past few years, what is happening now in the beer industry? Someone want to tackle this one?
That's probably mine. Yes. So what what's interesting about the PACT initiative is that we started working on this, I guess, about a year ago. Oh, you're going to hear my cat Basil for sure. I apologize, but he's a part of all of our calls.
Hey, all voices are equal.
He has a lot to say about everything. But so we started working on PACT about a year ago, I think it was, and it wasn't called PACT then, but it was just, you know, looking at how is sexual harassment and assault dealt with in the industry, right? So then in, I think, late April, early May, Brianne Allen, who at that time was a production brewer at Notch Brewing in Massachusetts, just went to work one day and had a pretty typical day for women in the craft industry, which is when like literally anybody can show up and say something shitty to you. And that was happening. It was just some guy who was delivering something for a project they were working on, made some sexist comment. And Brianne, I think, was just sick of it. And so she took to Instagram and just asked a simple question, where have you seen sexism in the beer industry? And that turned into sort of this explosion of responses, thousands of responses of people, mostly women, sharing their experiences of harassment and assault in the beer industry. And so the volume of that response sort of made it hard to ignore. And so from there, there's been since May, there's been this current just going of treatment of people in the beer industry. So there's been focus on HR, there's been focus on sexual harassment and assault, and then there's been some attention towards DEI initiatives in general. And yeah, so that's all been happening since May. There have been some changes and some conversations that have happened, but I think in general, still, anybody who works in the beer industry who isn't a straight white man still goes to work expecting something shitty to be said to them. It's still an expectation. It's still something that happens. It's still something that we deal with all the time. But at least now there's a conversation around it, and there is change being made. There are some systematic changes being made in spaces that I am a part of. So I would say the conversation is there and it's happening, and that's good. But I don't think we're anywhere close to having a cultural shift that makes that is making a huge impact quite yet. And that's okay, because these things take forever, right? So yeah, so that's where we are today.
Well, let me, you kind of exposed a little rabbit hole I want to dive down real quick. So a question I have, and I'd love to hear from all of you, is that I am a straight, white, Christian male. How do people who look like me make space for people who don't look like me?
Jeremy, I'm going to jump in because I look a lot like you, and I'm going to give a very simple answer before I kind of divulge it to the experts. Awareness. The more conversations we can have about this, the more we can, draw attention to the unfortunate things our peers are going through, the better we can hope to change the conversation to actually ways we can transform.
I would also say it's just a matter of listening. Let the stories be told and listen to them. And listening involves like also incorporating and believing. So I think that is step number one in this industry that will like help us to change our toxic culture.
Also, you don't know what you don't know, right? So education is pretty paramount here. Like, you might not realize that you have like unconscious bias or privilege or, things like that until you read about what that looks like from other people's perspectives, or observe, or watch or learn or listen to other people speak about it. So that, everybody has a little bit of unconscious bias in some way, shape, or form, whether it was like the way that you were raised, or the education that you've had, or friends that you've had, or where you grew up, or, things like that. And that's not your fault, but it is within your power to kind of take a step back and say, wait a second, I might not see things the same way that other people see things or experience them. And maybe I should notice that because the world is pretty diverse.
And I was going to add on to what Julie said is the component of having the courage and the vulnerability to say, I don't know, I don't understand. And I think, especially in this industry that is often dominated by similar voices and people in power, is letting go of that ego of having the power and control. And part of letting go that ego is really admitting to yourself that I don't know, I don't understand. And so how am I going to gain the awareness? As Andrew said, how am I going to actively listen and believe other people, as AJ said? That really starts from having the vulnerability of displacing that ego and admitting that there is so much more and always more for you to learn.
I had an interesting conversation a few years ago, and I've talked about this before in the podcast. And Lauren, I think I had this conversation with you, but I had the occasion to, I was at a beer competition, and I was sitting next to a woman brewer, and we were talking about that experience. And to summarize the conversation, and you kind of wrap it in a quick nutshell, there was a conversation that really had to do with there are some really loud voices out there, whether they are type A voices or the people with the money voices or the people with all the power. Those are the voices that are usually the loudest. And even myself, I mean, to kind of crack through some of those voices to kind of share a different perspective has been a challenge for me as well. And I can only imagine it's for someone who doesn't have quite as loud a voice, it's difficult to dive in there. And her comment was basically to be aware to make space for those other voices, because you get a lot more out of those voices. You get a lot more information, you get a lot more diversity, great ideas. But just because those voices aren't as loud as the ones who are dominating conversation doesn't make them any less valid. What do you guys make of that?
Well, one of the reasons that the voices aren't as loud is because we've been told to shut up our whole lives. Whether it's because we're a woman or because we're a person of color or because we're queer or whatever. And so I'm going to repeat some of what other people said, but I also hope I'm adding to it. So there's making the space, there's stepping back, there's creating the pause, there's saying, so-and-so, do you want to say something here? They're saying, would anybody who hasn't spoken yet like to say something? But then you also have to hold back and pause before your reaction or response as well, right? So, you know, the typical like guy suggesting something that a woman suggested and nobody hears it when the woman suggested it, only when the guy says it. You know, supporting what women and other marginalized people are saying, like, you know, I think that's a great idea, or let's come back around to what so-and-so said. Really, and this echoes what AJ and Dana were saying about when people tell you their truth, you have to listen to them and you have to believe them. Like, I can't tell you how much, I mean, I've been working against gender-based violence for more than 40 years. I can't tell you how much time I spend like on social media, which I probably shouldn't be doing anyhow, but like where someone says something and then everybody, like just today, there was a Facebook post in a hospitality group from a guy who had done an incredible bystander intervention after a customer had grabbed some body part of the hostess. And everybody's like, you shouldn't have done that. What's wrong with you? You made that up, et cetera, et cetera. Like, just listen. And you don't need to know I mean, in that case, it's not exactly the right story because it wasn't the person who was grabbed, who was telling the story. But when someone tells you what happened to them, listen to them and believe them. You don't need any more information. You don't need to ask questions. You're not an investigator. You're not making a legal decision. Just say, I'm sorry that happened to you.
So I'm going to go totally off script because this is fascinating to me, because there is a saying especially in the hospitality industry, that the customer is always right. So how everyone is shaking their head. No, and having worked in the industry for a very, very long time off and on, that is not true. But nonetheless, the adage is the customer is always right. So how do we fight against that mentality? How do we get rid of those bad customers so that they never come back and go to some other poor bar or restaurant? I mean, how do we navigate through that challenge and that thing that has also been pounded into our heads? Like Lauren, you said that, you know, women have been told to be quiet. Well, anyone who's worked in the industry have been told that the customer's always right. Do whatever it takes to satisfy them. How do we get through that?
I'm going to chime in here on this one. But first of all, Jeremy, this is not, I mean, just to make a side comment here, this is not anything new. You know, I've been in this industry since, oh gosh, I got my first restaurant job when I was 15, and my dad had to drive me to work. And I've been in the food and beverage space ever since, in some capacity, some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, like almost 10 years.
Thank you. Goodness. All right. So, you know, it's, the difference here is visibility, right? So now with tools like social media and, you know, things like that, there are, like, going back to like Brienne and Instagram and things like that, those stories, for as uncomfortable as it was to read, all of them are things that I am used to. It's just nobody has talked about them publicly. And then the difference was also that people were actually getting named, like businesses were getting named, which is different for all of us. So that was interesting. But I think going back to your specific question about how do we let the customer know that they aren't always right? Expectations for behavior, right? Whether it's a code of conduct for customers, for your public drinking spaces, for your team that you have working there, you can put codes of conduct, and you don't have to call it a code of conduct. You could call it behavior expectations, or what we expect to see from you while you're here, you know, however you want to view it. And I think I can't take credit for this. I think it came from an article that was written by Kate Bernot at some point for Good Beer Hunting, and in speaking about what happens when there's not written expectations is that people create their own narratives. So in the absence of, we expect this to take place on the premise in this space, people's human brains go willy-nilly, you know, and you just create your own expectations of what will happen while you're doing something or in some place. And that's the danger of that, is that you get into where if things aren't properly outlined, you know, what can I do? Can I grab the hostess? Can I be mean to my server? Can I, you know, I don't know. There's a host of other things that can go wrong in that situation. And then the same thing for your team, right? So what is the expected behavior of your team? What do the owners expect? What can you expect from each other? And making sure those are clear and lined out and documented in some place so that there's no questions being asked about what is expected.
The other thing I was going to add to that. Oh, sorry, Lauren. Do you want to?
No, go.
Just really quickly, because just to shine a light on Betsy and Lady Justice, because they do it really well, is like when you're writing those things out, write the shared purpose and the vision that you're looking to create. And I think often people focus on so much on like what we don't want, what we don't want, what we don't want. They focus less on what we're building towards. And when you speak, as I say, like, actually it's Kelly Deals said this, speak to the front of the class. When you speak to the front of the class, you're ultimately creating a space where people can show up and feel safe. And there's more of those people who are there for that shared purpose. And over time, less of the people who would walk in and be like, oh, this is not a space for me. And it's like, great. And so I just want to shine a light on Betsy and Lady Justice, because practically speaking, they do it so well.
Thanks. Yeah, we have a written mission statement for Lady Justice, and Lady Justice is a philanthropic brewery, so we have a social mission built into our company, and it's why Lady Justice exists. And so that helps us. Everything that we do has to be guided to the mission, which can help. And I tell this to people even who aren't opening like social enterprise breweries. You can have a company mission statement that very clearly lines out who you are, and if you make those company policies to align with your mission, it makes it a lot easier to just be transparent and honest about who you are. So, Lady Justice isn't perfect, and the customers that we get, we can't control anybody who walks in the space, but people get pretty good signals as soon as they walk in the door who we are and what we're about. And so part of it is, if you think it's okay to grab somebody's ass, just don't come to Lady Justice. Like, that's one way to do it. Like, and then when these things do happen, when we see problems, because we get less of actual physical issues, we get more issues. You can see power dynamics play out in people's spaces. So like a white man will come up to two women of color and insert himself into their conversation while he's ordering a beer at the bar. Those are the kind of the more nuanced things that we have to deal with at Lady J. And so part of what we do is like, are the behaviors that we're seeing out of our customers, does that align with our mission? And if not, how do we address those issues? And part of it is that I think people are really scared to be in the place that's doing the wrong thing, or have the friends, or be the person who is doing the wrong thing. And so when we get called out on our behavior, I think our natural response is to deny it and be like, no, that's not actually happening. And so that's why we don't believe people when they say stuff has happened to them. And so part of what needs to change is just how we as people learn how to come into contact with criticism, and how we as people learn how to be in spaces that are really, really uncomfortable. And so I've had to learn that a lot with Lady J, and I've had a lot of practice. So it's easier for me to do it than just somebody just walking in who just really just wants a beer. They just want to sit down and have a beer and be left alone. And that's awesome. Like, that's usually me when I go into a brewery. But we have to be willing to learn. As a business owner, I have the responsibility to learn how to have tough conversations with my staff and with my customers in a way that is still compassionate and still wants them to stick around. So there's a lot of hard work that has to be done, which is why this isn't done quickly or at all, because it sucks a lot of the time. But the result is amazing. And it's really fun to be able to be in a space where you can at least feel a little bit better about your surroundings and where you're spending your money and all of that. So.
Well, I've got a follow-up question, but AJ, I think I saw you unmute. Did you have something you wanted to chime in?
Yeah, I hope I can tie what everybody said into what I was going to say. But what Betsy just said about how it is hard work. Yes, it is hard work. However, it's work. Safe Bars will show you that it's work that you're already doing. So if the customer is already right, is already an adage in our industry, and we know that we have to deal with people who want to be served, and you don't want to overserve them. So we are already having these conversations. The customer is not right when they want another shot and they're fall down drunk. We have techniques already that we use to deal with that. We are just expanding the conversation. This is not a place where you can come in and grab the hostess ass, because it's just not the place. So we have techniques. We Safe Bars trains folks, or many times we find that you train us, just giving us examples of how you deal with things in that situation, because these situations are already happening in many different kind of circumstances. So So yes, I want to echo that it is hard work, but it's work you're already doing. And so that should give you a little peace of mind.
Well, that is a fantastic segue. I'm sorry, Lauren, go ahead.
Well, I just want to pull one thread of what people are talking about, which is, you know, I've been doing the Safe Bars work since 2013. I've been in a lot of hospitality spaces. And I think we all know intuitively, without thinking about how we got there, what is the place you're going to tell your friends, oh, that's a totally cool place, you'll love it there, go. And what is the place you're going to tell your friends, do not go there. It is not going to be good for you there. You know, some of it is the conscious decisions like Betsy's talking about, but some of it is just the culture that is created, which comes from the top down, very in large part, not exclusively, but comes from the top down, and that everybody who works there has a role in creating either a safe, welcoming, and respectful place or a place that's not. And so people, once they understand how they can have a role in that, I think are very happy to create a positive, respectful place. And, you know, going specifically to the question of, you know, the imperative of the customer always being right, having been in a lot of bars, restaurants, breweries, etc., having these conversations, I find more and more owners and managers who are saying, maybe not the customer isn't always right, maybe not in those words, but they're saying, we have values here, and I am empowering you, our staff, to carry those out, and I have your back. And that's exactly what we need to happen. You know, the owners and managers are saying, you know, you have the power and go forth and do this. And what Safe Bars does is just add a few skills. So I think we're seeing change in those ways.
So I have found myself in a few different airports recently. And of course, anytime you go to an airport, they have a mask mandate in the airport. And you know, I have to say that I kind of love airports. It's almost like you have a global culture in an airport. I was just in an airport in Texas. That's not Texas culture in that airport. It's global culture, no matter what airport. And it's kind of cool because you see everybody and everything. I've seen things that have shocked me. I've seen things that, you know, probably should have shocked me, but didn't. But one thing that I've noticed is that they have this mask mandate. You know, everyone needs to wear a mask in the airport. But then, of course, invariably, you see people who are not wearing their mask for whatever reason. But no one's enforcing it. No one's walking around. There's no mask police saying, well, you need to put your mask on. You need to put your mask on. So that is my long-winded kind of story-based way of saying, so we have these, you know, at Lady Justice and other places, we have these rules. We've published them. Now, and Betsy, you kind of alluded to that uncomfortable part. How are we now enforcing some of this stuff? What's the best way to enforce this stuff?
So I think I can answer your question without fully answering your question. You know, Betsy talked a lot about having a really strong mission statement. And for any brewery that doesn't have a mission statement, get out a pen and paper right now and write down 5 words you want to use to describe the experience you aim to create, because that's so important to have. And Lauren talked a lot about the importance of creating a safe, respectful, positive company culture that, you know, kind of radiates from the top down, not always, but through your staff, which will radiate across the bar to the customers. And I think at the end of the day, we like to drink with people that we like, and people like to drink at our establishments because they are in line with our values. So I think your guest will begin to, you know, respect who you are. They're going to align with you, and they're going to tell their friends about you. And it's going to start to populate your tap room with people who believe in your mission, and ultimately they believe in your brand. So I think by default of having that strong purpose, which we share with everyone we interact with, not just in our tap room, it could be the person on the street who asks you what you're doing, or while you're at the airport and say, hey, what do you do? And you tell them about, Lady Justice Brewing and what we stand for, they're going to want to have a beer with you someday. And so by building that philosophy around your brand, it's going to help you attract those people and guests and suppliers and anyone you interact with who agree with you. And, I think it's important to have these conversations. And I think that's where you start, by having a strong mission and passion behind you want to be, because that's going to help bring those people in who align with that mission.
Is it ever okay to not be confrontational, but to be very direct with a customer and say that this behavior is not tolerated, and you are not welcome here? Is that ever okay?
100%. When I was the director of retail and events at Steam Whistle Brewing, that's how I got my start in craft beer. I can pull many examples, but I'll pick one of when I intervened in a situation where one of our staff members, a woman on the team who was working in retail, was being harassed by a supplier. So this is often sometimes that you have a supplier, they have a relationship with the company, they feel safe and protected because upper management, they've got this relationship, there's an exchange of money, a transaction, right? So they're protected. And this guy was just in really inappropriate comments, and it was making her very uncomfortable. And she'd already tried to intervene and say, like, please stop, like, leave me alone, this is not okay. And he wasn't listening. And so in that regard, it is uncomfortable. We have somebody who's an outlier, but you have to deal with it. And so I went and took him aside, and I just was, very clear with him that that behavior was not okay. And it didn't matter that he was a supplier and he had a good relationship with the co-founders. Like, he can take that behavior somewhere else. It will not happen in the retail and event space here. And I allowed him to also talk, and we had a back and forth, and I stayed curious and compassionate to where he was at. And what actually ended up happening was, not only did he leave this woman alone and stopped coming as often to the bar because he could not control himself, is then over time we had a more respectful relationship, the two of us. And like, he knew that I wasn't messing around and that the co-founders had my back, and that if he wanted to re-enter the space and, like, after doing his work to come back, that I would welcome him in, but there would be boundaries and a conversation before that. And so eventually he did come back to drinking, but his behaviors changed, and they had to change over time. But we had to, it's not enforcing, it's just really upholding those boundaries and making sure there's still a place to have a conversation with the person over time.
So basically, you bought the bully on the nose and you held your line, and that sent a message not only to the person trying to cross that line, but everyone else who was watching that exchange. Everyone knew that this line will not be crossed. Right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And you have to keep holding that line. And I think doing that in a way that's not shaming people. I'm big on that. Like, I could have made a huge scene about it and been like, I'm not going to use expletives, but like, I could have really called him out in a way that shamed him as a person. That was not the way to go about it. But holding that line and the boundaries and making it about, again, these values that are important to this space. Like, your behavior is a problem. I don't think you're the problem right now. Your behavior is. So until we get that in check, you're not welcome here.
Awesome. Anyone else?
Well, I was just going to say training and practice is huge. I mean, we just did our Safe Bars training last week, and being able to have the practice and giving our beer tenders the ability to be able to have a toolbox. So here are some things that you can say, right? And here's what to expect when you say it. And they've all gone through their TIPS certified training, right? These are things training your staff, we train staff on everything, right? So this should just be a part of your regular training process. So that way your staff, they already have some stuff that they can say. They have stuff in their back pocket that they at least know, like, at least know if I say this to this person, the manager's going to back me up because this is what I was told to say, right? And sometimes it's just that easy, because dealing with some people is really difficult, and that's something that all bartenders, it's part of the job, unfortunately. And so just train them to be able to know when to step in, how to step in, what to say and when, which is why the Safe Bars training is so great, because you're given those tools just like you're given the same sort of tools in the tips training. Our bartenders know exactly what to say when they have to cut somebody off. They know that, right? So that's why I think, bringing it back to the PACT initiative, like, I think that's why this is so important, because it's offering a toolbox for staff. You don't have to make this up. You don't have to figure this out on your own. The resources are out there. You just have to get them and use them.
Well, and just for the sake of time, I'm going to launch into another question, but I don't think it's a coincidence that we all happen to kind of work in beer. But there has been a kind of a reckoning of the sort in the entertainment industry a few years ago, and there may have been other reckonings. There's probably plenty of industries where there still needs to be a reckoning or an awareness, or kind of go through this process, this difficult but yet difficult process that ultimately leads to betterment. Is beer a good tool to bring about this change, or is it just a convenient, coincidental tool that's bringing about this change?
I have an answer, but I talk a lot, so I don't want to say
it. I like that Betsy is talking this much, because Betsy is usually
well,
introverted.
You got me after coffee.
Which is amazing. I'm going to concede to Betsy and let her go, because I want to hear her talk.
So I have this thing about beer is a liquid form of breaking bread with people. So as humans, since the beginning of civilization, we have gathered over food and drink. There's something about that inside of us that makes us want to gather with people. And because beer has been there since the beginning, thanks to all of the beautiful women in the world, it's a natural place for us to go to get this work done. Because there is something special. The reason that we go into pubs and tap rooms is because they become spaces. I also come from a theology world, and I think that pubs are replacing churches, but that's like a whole other thing. We go into tap rooms, we find our regular like drinking spots, right? We have our neighborhood drinking holes. We see the staff that we come to know and love. We sit in the same place every time. We get to know our surroundings. And so for me, of course it's going to happen with beer, and it happens very naturally with beer. And if you're including some non-alcoholic spaces or food and other kind of drink in your space, this can also happen to people outside of those who drink too. So right, so if you're bringing together a community space that's truly a community space for all people, and if beer happens to be involved, like, that's awesome, that's great. But yeah, so beer is a very natural place for this to happen. There's no reason why it wouldn't happen in beer.
And I'll jump in on this one. One reason I think, AJ, go ahead.
Initially, Jeremy said something, I'm paraphrasing, that we try to do better with a beer in our hand. Like, I think there's a reason why, if you are celebrating something, you go grab a beer. If you just finish helping your friend move, you go grab a beer. You had a disagreement, let's go talk about it over a beer. There is a reason why that happens. And also there's a reason why, it's anecdotal for me, but there's a reason why bartenders are like also therapists. Like they communicate well, they listen well already. So I think it's a built-in industry for this conversation to happen. We're already doing the work. When you listen well, you already have a shared experience with a person who may be of a different culture or a different experience than you have. So you have your minds are already expanded to welcome people. So I think this industry is ripe for this conversation. I think that's why it's grown its legs so strong. Like, I think it's not just a performative thing like we may have seen in Hollywood. There was a big Me Too movement, and then like the stories have kind of died down. But I think with this industry, we're really trying to do something about it. And I think that's because of our just mission as purveyors of spirit.
And to go back with the airport travel analogy, when you're in an airport with someone you've never seen before, there's one thing you have in common. You're all going somewhere. So you can begin that conversation with, where are you going? And it opens up doors for greater conversation. So when you're in a brewery, you've already chosen to go to the same spot, probably because of the shared love of craft beer in some aspects. So you can start these conversations a little bit easier when you have that something in common. I think it can lead to deeper and more meaningful conversations just because you already have that starting point.
I love the notion. I've heard people talk about breweries as like a third place, or even coffee shops as that third place. You've got work, you've got home, and then you've got that third place where you go spend your time and you commune with your people, your tribe. And then there's also that mindset that I've heard people say, even Father Isaac, when I spoke with Spencer Abbey, talked about the thin places. It was people have talked about the thin places, that when you have a beer, you kind of are open up to something bigger than just what that beer represents. Do we effectively have that third place in those thin places because of beer? Does that help this conversation move forward at all? Or have I just been drinking too much beer lately?
I think it does. I mean, if you think of a concept of a table, right, in general, where you share ideas and conversation and other perspectives, and it's a place of learning, right? So what do we have a lot of in our beer spaces? We have a lot of tables. We have a lot of places for people to pull up a seat and join into a productive conversation. So I think, and honestly, if you think about craft beer in general, everybody's not drinking the same things. There's room for, inclusion. Like if somebody wants to drink an IPA, they can drink an IPA at the same time that I'm drinking a sour. And then another person over here can be drinking a stout. And the whole concept of it doesn't have to be the same for everybody. I mean, if you really think about it, that's why craft broke away from macro, where it was general, yellow, fizzy, light beers, things. And I'm totally generalizing things here, but I think everybody knows what I'm saying. I'm also going to get teased for my analogies, by the way, because in this group, I always end up having some weird analogy that I end up bringing out. And this is just par for the course. So bear with me. But, I think that's the essence of the whole industry, right? What can we do differently? What can we innovate? What can we adapt that is outside of our norm? Whether it's ingredients or flavors or aromas or styles, and what can we borrow from other cultures and communities and history and things like that. And if you think about it, it really is a wonderful microcosm of the whole idea of bring different things to the table, learn from each other, share with each other. And so, yeah, that's my Julie analogy of the day.
One thing that was great, Julie. That's a good analogy. No, the one thing I want to add is we spent a good amount of time talking about the tap room experience, the experience with the public facing, but I think what I just want to bring it back to is the experience for the people also at those tables, at those boardroom tables, at their desks that are working in craft beer or working in craft beverage organizations, because a lot of the gender-based harassment and violence is happening internally in the organization at those tables. And what's not happening is more of the conversations, the ongoing conversations of how do we create safer spaces everywhere. So, and we talking about what Julie was chatting about with innovation is, You know, when you're innovating with your colleagues, like part of the ability to be able to do that is to be able to show up as you are, to be listened to. So going back to how we started this conversation about active listening, that's so much a part of it. And when certain people, so people that breweries and organizations, beverage organizations have sought to marginalize or not listen to, or they experience more harassment, they end up leaving. And when we go talk about the ability to innovate, and a big problem that a lot of craft breweries are facing is retention, how to hire and retain great talent. Well, this is all part of that conversation as well. So it's not just about what happens in the tap room. It's about what's happening behind the scenes as well. It's so important. And we are going to have more innovative, safer spaces, you know, talented people, better retention. You know, it all is going to come back to higher profit margins for those organizations. So this is such a bigger conversation than just what's happening while you're having a beer in the tap room.
Well, let me ask this question then for anyone who wants to answer this. And it may sound a little loaded, and maybe it's intended to be, but do we have to fully understand the other person in order to listen? Do we have to have that same shared experience for us to agree? I mean, is that a requirement of this process that you're all talking about? I mean, what if I disagree with you? What happens then? What if I think that, oh no, yeah, we disagree? How do we move forward from there?
No. We're in this weird space culturally, societally, where we're taught that anybody who doesn't agree with our ideologies or our thoughts is our enemy, right? Our political landscape has taught us this over the last 6 or 7 years. And I think there's been a lot of damage done that we don't know how to come together with people who are different from us. And that's really, really dangerous. And I think that stops a lot of us from being willing to have important conversations around these spaces. And it just shouldn't be like that. Just don't be a jerk. Like, it's okay to talk to other humans that you disagree with. It's okay to be polite to people, and have interesting, fun conversations. And there's just a really sad thing happening, that when we learn that somebody doesn't believe exactly what we believe, that means that they're automatically bad. And that's just not true. Like, we all know it. Like, if we all just take a step back and be like, wait a minute, that's bullshit, right? So yeah, no, I don't think that it's a requirement to only bring up these conversations with people that believe the same thing you do. What we have to figure out is how to have these conversations, and how to be comfortable in spaces with people that we don't know. And how do we end up back in spaces with people we don't know, right? Because social media has taught us that we need to be insular and only hang out with people who think like this. So again,
I think that's where beer comes in.
Yeah. And I know it's very hard to take anything I say seriously right now because of Basil, but yes, the beer spaces are a place to come back in and have these conversations. And I don't know, like, therapy pets are really great. Maybe Basil needs to go to the tap room and teach people to chill out a little bit.
And I just want to build on top of that the way we reach shared understanding is still by listening, right? And I'm going to mangle what I think is the James Baldwin quote here, that, basically it's fine to disagree, but if your disagreement is about, my right to exist or my legitimacy or who I am, somebody can do better on this James Baldwin quote to help me out here. But like, if it's rooted in diminishing of me or disrespecting of me, then that's not a conversation we're having. So, I totally agree with Betsy. We have to learn again how, if we ever had a way to talk to people that we don't agree with, that we don't see eye to eye with. But if your disagreement is rooted in who I am, then that's not a conversation. That's a conversation for someone else to take over. For the people who look like them to take over and do that work. Thank you. Dana came to the rescue. We can disagree.
Yeah,
and
no,
still
I
each
love
other.
this quote. So yeah, it's we can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. And that was from James Baldwin.
Yeah, so basically what Lauren said.
But way, way more gracefully.
Well, for the sake of time, again, for the sake of time, so this pact is out there, and what is it? How do people get involved with the pact, and what happens next for those entities that get involved with the pact that you have put together?
Is that me?
It could be any of us. I think
1, 2, 3, not it.
I know. I think first of all, just go to the website to get some top level information, right?
And what website is that, Julie?
That is www.safebarspact.com. That's SAFEBARSPACT.com. And get some top level information about how you can get involved with the Safe Bars PACT initiative. And before I hand this off to everybody else that can follow up with things, I want to say we have a lot of talk. We've been talking a lot about hospitality and like front of the house and things like this, but Safe Bars certification training goes beyond that. So if you have a sales team that's working out in the field with other people, they're vulnerable and in vulnerable positions as well. It could be back of the house. It could be your administrative staff that's dealing with vendors. Don't think it's only for front of house customer facing, so to speak, like DTC, but that the principles are also rooted for the entire organization. So, and I'll let somebody else take over from here.
And to kind of
Owners
piggyback
and
on
managers included, leadership included. I just want to make sure that goes in there. It's got to be leaders, got to be participating in this with their staff.
And Jeremy, I know how passionate you are about just education in general. And the more the team at the brewery or the business or whatever it may be is able to understand how to handle themselves in these situations, be more respectful and help create safer spaces, the better. And that's just like everybody said, everyone should be involved.
Awesome. Anyone else?
Leaders included, as Dana said, is so important because of the examples that we gave before about having a person's back. If we empower our employees to stand up and be direct with people who are contributing to the toxic culture, then if they, say something, retaliation is not the subsequent thing that happens. What happens after is support. So to be supportive, you have to also buy in. So you have to be involved in the conversation.
I just want to chime in a little bit about what happens after you go to the website. So when you go to www.safebarspact.com, you can download a free copy of Our House, Our Rules, which is the pact that we've been talking about, that you can adopt for your establishment, for your company. And you share your contact information. Someone from Safe Bars will reach out to you about further options beyond the pact, which includes the Safe Bars training that folks have been talking about here, that Lady Justice just participated in. So all of our trainings are tailored to your individual brewery and needs. Somebody will reach out to you to find out more about what those are. And then if you like, you can sign up and get the training.
And sorry, Dana, I think you're about to jump in.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, from a practical standpoint, so I mentioned I'm the co-founder of Enswell Beer. We're in Canada. And so for the Canadian listeners and who might have a small team, like right now, it's just my partner and I, Safe Bars is amazing because when we reached out and we clicked and we're adopting the pact, we're working with us to customize something so that we can either join on with another small Canadian brewery at a time, like a time zone that works for us. So I just want to shout out to Safe Bars in that their team does a really great job of then responding and finding a way that it's going to work for your specific brewery, your size of team, where you're located, and what your goals are.
Well, and I appreciate you all for the work that you're doing, for coming on and sharing the story. I think, like we talked about before, when it comes to enforcing this stuff, you never want to do it in a shaming way, but you kind of want to do it in a way that sends a message to everyone in the rest of the restaurant, rest of the brewery and the bar, that this is a safe place. We are holding the line. But I think it goes beyond that. I think it goes beyond that. We are sending a message to our local community, our bigger community, and by extension, frankly, when this airs and when it's on video and audio, I'm effectively sending a message to my son and my daughter that this is the way that things need to be from now on. This is that thin space that I talked about, where, I mean, we're talking about beer, but we're talking about so much more for so much longer. So that's kind of my thing that I want to say as we start going out, that this is within the realm of possibility to establish in your own business, and this is far more important than just making sure that everyone feels immediately safe. This is a bigger deal. The ripples continue out across the pond, so to speak. And that's just my take on it. But what I want to ask for you guys as we go out is effectively, when this airs, we're gonna kind of cap off the year. Do you have any New Year's resolutions or calls to action or final words of wisdom that you want to share with anyone listening?
I'll jump in. So the Safe Bars Pact, no matter when this airs, is meant to be valuable at any point in time, whether you're listening in December of 2021 or you find this episode in December 2022. The tools and resources that Safe Bars can provide in adopting, a long-term commitment to creating safer and more respectful spaces is something that's going to always be important in our industry. So no matter when you are listening to this, take the steps to dedicate yourself towards that. And Happy New Year.
I think what I could say is probably, I always encourage people, can you tell I'm a business consultant? I'm always like, make a resolution to improve processes, like, in your new sales year, like when we cross over into the new calendar year. And I would strongly encourage any organization involved with food or beverage to incorporate this into your strategic business planning. I mean, if you don't have a good base and you don't have a good infrastructure, there's so many things that can spiral out of control. Like, turnover is expensive. It affects the productivity of your organization if people's mental health is damaged. It affects the, foot traffic of, your drinking spaces, right? And so it affects so many facets of your business. I would say, look at this as an investment, not an expense. Adopt it into your annual business planning practices. And this is not just me, making things up. Inclusive and equitable, respectful workspaces are more profitable for the long term than ones that aren't. So it is possible to have spaces full of respect and equity and inclusion and also make a profit at the same time. You just have to put a little bit of effort behind it.
I was going to say what Julie said. So it does come back to your brand at some point if you do or don't do this. So budget for it. You don't have to race to do it right now if you can't afford it, but you can plan for this. You can allocate some profits from merch or beer or whatever towards this, and you will have a better trained staff, and who doesn't want that? So yeah, listen to Julie. She's right.
I've said that more than once.
I mean, just like education, this is one of the many ways you should be investing in your team.
Right on.
And I was going to add that make sure that this is a conversation that doesn't continue like in a siloed way, like, okay, only the retail and event staff are a part of it, or just the marketing. Like, obviously from my hat, I'm all about collaborative projects and people with different voices and perspectives and contributions, finding a way of working together so that they can all hear those different perspectives and integrate that into their learning. So for breweries starting to do this work and make investments, make sure that once everyone has had the training, that the conversations continue, and that the conversations continue almost like if you can put together like a collaborative advisory team of different people throughout the organization that then can come back and they keep having the conversation and they keep with the implementation, so that the training is not just happening in a vacuum by team and at one point in the year.
Okay, final thoughts, AJ and Lauren. You guys want to weigh in?
I just have to say what they said. That's all. So well said. Thank you.
Yeah, that's my problem too. You guys all covered what I was gonna say, but I would say, just echo what I said before, that you have the ability to have these conversations right now. Just keeping in mind the overarching tenet of respectful discourse. Keeping some things in mind about how believing the people that are speaking. So this whole Me Too movement, the only thing that would hinder a respectful discourse if you disagree with the people who are coming forward saying that this industry is messed up. So keep having these conversations is what I would say. And Safe Bars can expand your knowledge about the kind of insidious nature and how these toxic characteristics are woven into everything that we do. But if you start thinking about it now, you'll be already on the way.
And I think some of the take-home messages I got from today is if you want to open your mouth, pour some beer into it and just keep your ears open, is kind of what it comes down to, right? I'm getting some nods.
Yeah, no, and also this work is hard, so it's better when we do it together. It's why we all came together as a collaborative team. It's why Safe Bars, as AJ said, exists to facilitate these conversations. We're better together. So let's just keep doing that work and knowing that this is not work that we can do alone. And that there are amazing, the Safe Bars PACT initiative is one amazing resource. There are lots of others. So take advantage of them and don't do this work alone.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you all so much for coming together to talk to me about this and kind of share this story and ways that we can actually move forward starting now. But thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy.